Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Viddishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both together. May that one nourish us both together. May we work conjointly with great energy. May our study be vigorous and effective. May we not mutually and unnecessarily disagree or dispute. And peace, peace, peace be unto all. So this evening's subject or topic is to do with symbols and forms. But before we dive into the relevance of symbols and forms, we should say a little bit about the relativity of perception. I don't know if you can see, but on the board behind, there's a small diagram. This is where we normally put ourselves here. And this is normally what we relate to. And this whole circle is our world, designated our world. But you'll see that no matter how big or small I make the circle, there's always the implication of something outside it, something beyond it. Two things are being seen: the limitation of the circle that is drawn and the unlimited, as it were, beyond it. We can go a little further. We can say this whiteboard is here and the room is beyond it. And then beyond the room, a building, and then beyond the building, an area, beyond the area, a region, beyond that, a country, and beyond that, a continent, beyond that, a globe, beyond that, a solar system, beyond that, a galaxy. Beyond, you can go on almost infinitely because there's always something beyond. That's the point. And so what we view as our reality can only have some relative existence. And one of the best examples I can give is that when conditions are right, standing on the ground, given certain cloud conditions, for example, we can perceive a rainbow. What is a rainbow? Well, it's molecules of water, and the light refracts through it into 7 discernible colors. But there's an inference, and science also knows it, that beyond the range of our vision, that is, below the red part of the spectrum is infrared, and above the violet part of the spectrum is ultraviolet, not seen by the eye, yet scientifically understood and proven. But what happens if we go beyond the refracted light to the unrefracted aspect of it? We change the angle and we go above the clouds. Before, we were sitting below it, looking at it. Above the clouds, the rainbow is gone. And there we find the original white light present, that below the cloud is refracted under these certain conditions. So in this way, this whole universe is something like a range of vibrations going on, and we can apply it also to the human mind. The human mind has a number of thoughts, and we can steer the mind as well. Even when we come down to earth again, we can see the colors of the spectrum. Our eyes can register it, and again, going above the cloud, it goes away. Now suppose after rising in the morning, washing, dressing, and so on, we allow the mind to float freely, and I can now recall the lines on which it went. The thinking took a certain kind of course of action. I can witness it, witness these various vibrations. Vibrations means I can see where a thought arose, where it had its special place on the stage of the mind, and when it decided to go. We can put it in these peculiar terms. And so the naked eye, just as the naked eye can see the colors of the spectrum, but have no understanding of the infrared or the ultraviolet, we can look at these thoughts in the same way and wonder and ask the question that the current that is being used and observed, what is that? Where did it come from? What is the original source of the power that makes us live? What is the energy as such? We can find its presence just as we find the rainbow captured within the scope of our vision. We can find its presence, caught as it were, in a cage of time and space and causation. Was it always like that? Or was it something like, in our example, was above the clouds and always present until a condition made it refracted? How did it enter into this cage of space and time? Was it originally free and infinite? These questions can arise. Could it be a presentation in a limitless sphere, just like sunshine going and opening up in all directions? And in the meditation we have just done, I used as an example. Could it be something like when the sun shines and I have a tin roof? I'm thinking of Africa. Because in Africa, India, and various other countries, when it rains pretty hard, but there's a certain comfort in listening to the rain fall on a tin roof. It drowns out all the other sounds. Supposing no rain is there, but there's a small hole, small point in my tin roof, the sunshine will find access. It will find itself as a small spot reflected on the floor. Looking at from the ground, I'll see this little spot. And I know that if I widen this hole, the spot will also widen. The circle will also widen. Just as the circle is here, it will widen. And then if I open it more and more and more of the sky and the sun is being seen. And I'll see more on the floor. But if I take the roof off completely, then the whole thing is exposed. And I can see, as it were, the infinite sky and sun. Now nothing changed. The sun didn't change. I didn't change. The ground didn't change. The small spot on the floor never changed. What changed was the broadening of experience, the broadening of the mind, the broadening of my vision expanded. That's all that happened. And it wasn't really a broadening. In a certain sense, we can say it was like an evolution. We can use that term for convenience. We can, in a sense, say the sky evolved from a small pinhole to a wider hole, and ultimately it became infinite. There's a language we could use. It's one way of putting it. But it is clear that neither the sky nor I evolved or changed. Only the thing that interfered, it made it look like a framework that shed progressively its limitations until, in fact, all the limitations were gone. Now, mostly we are living on the ground level. We're only seeing this limitation. And how to remove these obstacles becomes a question. And for most people, it will be to use all the energy that we normally have, as love, as anger, as hate, as resentment, as all the human emotions, and see if we can gather that all together and see if we can direct it in a useful way. And so that is why all religions, almost without exception, will use this love of God or equivalent thereof as a way of directing all this energy and removing these obstacles to our vision. There is a wonderful period of time in Hinduism that is a time of year, in the autumn, dedicated to mother worship. The Durga Saptashtami is there, a story, a great unfolding, telling us of the greatness of a divine mother, God in the form of a divine mother. Of course, all ritualistic worship is intended to be an easy, artistic, and enjoyable method of realizing perfection, of opening up this roof. And the values that are implied by the general terms perfection can also conveniently be broken down into expressive words as power, wisdom, bliss. In the practice of meditation, or what we like to call the art of guiding thought or guiding thought movements, these three can be represented in Hinduism anyway as Durga, Saraswati, and Lakshmi. For those not familiar with Hinduism, we can say it is these values embodied as this power, this wisdom, and this bliss. But why would we put them in any kind of human form? And they are in human form. Even though these symbolisms of these three values, what we might call deities, a confusing term, will have many arms and many attributes and so on and so forth, will look not exactly as humans look. The expression in their face will be different, all calm, all loving, all beneficent, all blessing. Not like the human distortions of the face that represent reactions. When things impinge from this object area on this eye, and the eye reacts. Not at all like that. And we only have 2 hands, 2 arms, 2 legs, if we're lucky, only 1 head, but these can have many of them because they have governing functions. Supposing you were to ask me, how many heads does the civil service have or the government have? Well, is the head of the Department of Defense, the head of Home Affairs. How many arms? Well, there's the military arm, there's the Home Affairs arm, there's the social development arm, there is the Ministry of Culture arm. All these various branches are there. So that when we look at a form, we can consider this as a governing entity in human terms. Because what we call God, there's a technical term in Vedanta for it. It's called Ishvara, the one that lords, the one that governs, the one that stands in a rulership position. But what is that? This God that all religions have, in terms of human concept and human values and human attributes, is the highest representation to the human mind of the absolute, where there is no change, where there are no moving parts, where there is no substantial difference in time, just as the sun doesn't change in the example I gave. And just as the ground doesn't change, nothing changes. The only thing is that our vision becomes broader and the obstacle of the tin roof becomes less. That's all. It looks like an evolution, but no change ever happened. How can we grasp this? So we can say that there is a supreme universal purpose going forward, and there is nature. What is nature? Nature can be regarded as the infinite storehouse that produces you and me and all the other manifestations of nature that we put here under this heading of objects, people, places, and events, things that are related. And we can't exclude the seeing, registering entity. We can't say that I am separate from nature. Sometimes we talk about nature as if we are not part of nature. Humanly speaking, of course, physically we are part of nature. But in every respect, both psychologically, emotionally, physically, we're all part of nature. And even when this part of nature goes away, that is called the physical, biological entity goes away and gets transformed into some other entity, the psychological entity is still there. still carried forward. And religions register this as soul, what we call jiva. So the story of the greatness of the Divine Mother, consisting of 700 stanzas, presents 4 philosophical hymns woven into these interesting stories. And these 3 in turn form part of an all-covering 4th story. But the 4th deals with the king, Surata, and a merchant, Samarthi. Both were deprived. The king was deprived of his kingdom by powerful invaded forces, and the merchant was deprived of all his ownership from his family, by his family. And they both understood this glory of this Divine Mother that was represented. They all understood her as time and its subdivisions. The technique of securing her grace both knew. By worshiping her and meditating upon her, but they had 2 different intentions in mind. The one had the intention of perfection. The other had the intention of materialism. Let me get my possessions back. And both have been granted. Because when we use the concept of a deity, when we use the concept that involves qualities of giving and loving and all these other things, and protecting, we are really, when we issue an attention for our own self, in other words, when we're issuing something for this circle, essentially for my welfare, we will get it. Because there's a science behind it. Because we're using these symbols and these forms and these images as we would use the aperture of a keyhole. We can use it to lock ourselves in, we can use it to make ourselves secure, or we can use it to look and see that even through the keyhole, when I put my eye close to it, I can see a whole infinite vista behind. And then I can understand, if I simply open the door itself, I don't have to look through the keyhole. So we have to look at this idea of perfection, either from one of two angles in Vedanta. The one angle, we can see if we can avoid the use of these things and keep things in an abstract way, or we can decide that we will use all the art and culture and beauty available to us. We can take advantage of all the songs of poets, all the architecture of temples and shrines, beautiful architecture worldwide, whatever religion there are, we can use this. We can see how much feeling goes into this and how it moves the heart. And in this beautiful, artistic, and enjoyable way, we can arrive at this grand vision of perfection. And so the lesson from this greatness of the Divine Mother that is celebrated every year, where every devotee repeats and recites these 700 stanzas and meditates on the meaning of the events, mythological as they are, they can find out either to get a boon for which they seek, or up to the point that both of these approaches can be similarly situated in their origin. Both had their possessions taken away from them. But at the crucial moment of replying, each has given a different answer to their requirements. And before actual practice, or in the course of it, the king in the story did not or could not detach himself from his craving for sovereignty, but the merchant could. And so we have these two options available to us. Now, in terms of using images and symbols, these are devices. These can be used as devices on the one hand. And there's a science behind it. What is that science? Thought moves faster than a sunbeam. When you put a thought in, you immediately get the result. And a standard rule in meditation is whatever you meditate on, that comes to you. Be it a quality, be it an object, whatever it is, it comes to you. And we are unconsciously meditating all the time. When we hear the news around us, when we listen to the stories, the bad news taking place all over the world, and we feel our anxiety level rise and our blood pressure increase, and then this carries with us throughout the day, we can't stop thinking of that. Is this not a kind of meditation? Is this not the issuing of a thought? Not understanding that we have the freedom to detach and observe all these thoughts arising in the mind and attune our attention in to the source of this thought current itself. And those are the two options available to us. And so when we talk about the subject of idols and idolatry, in the interfaith context, it's sometimes a very difficult subject. The reason for that is because Abrahamic religions arose from tribal communities where they had different types of tribal deities. And what it means is, if I want to overrule and conquer a neighboring tribe in tribal warfare, that tribe that I'm combating has its deity, has its god, something like a patriarch in a patriarchal society, something like a king, a male form, no doubt. And my deity is the same thing. But my deity, I have great faith in because it's my tribal Moloch or my tribal representative deity. And so when I conquer and succeed in my conquest of the other tribe, I can clearly say it was because of the help I was given. And I made some kind of contract. If you give me this, I will do that. And the faith in that deity made the conquering tribe superior. And in order to make a cohesiveness within the tribal society, I have to ban all other concepts of God. When I say God, I'm talking of a singular entity. Because here I was talking about gods and deities, plural. But when we talk about that entity that has all the qualities that we admire and that we raise up to the highest ideal, it's all the same language because we are humans. And because we are humans, in Swami Vivekananda's language, we have to have a human deity. And because if we were fish, we would have a fish god. If we were buffaloes, we'd have a buffalo god. But because we are humans, we require a human God. The highest ideal in our spiritual and logical and biological evolution is man. And man is a thinking creature. The ideal is man. You know, you have these ideals called idols also, and they're put in a Hollywood kind of context. My film idol, you see. Or a pop idol, a popular idol, or a singing idol, some entity that people look at, admire greatly, and would like to be like that because of their qualities. Of course, when they examine their lifestyles, it's not exactly like that. And that's the difficulty. What we have done is we've taken away possibly this highest spiritual ideology and put in the human ideology in its place. But all religion, when it uses these concepts, these human concepts, they are looking at the highest possible ideals. Dedication is a remarkable term. It suggests this high ideal, a noble cause, a worthy goal of the human heart that is inwardly sought. It shows the necessity for the elimination of the non-essentials and mobilizing every available unit of energy, employing all of it systematically along the chosen path that we select. And we know what's involved. And when we are dedicated, for example, to art or national welfare or any other cause, first we have to collect the best, most up-to-date information on it. And in spiritual life, this we get from scriptures. But what are scriptures? They are the words of people, be it the sages of the Vedas, be it the Jesus of the Gospels, be it the prophets of the Jewish texts, or be it the Quran of the Prophet Muhammad. So first we collect all this, and now we have some principles to work with. And with great skill in securing the willing cooperation of one and all, we manage to get something moving. And finally, with persistence, vigilance, mounting enthusiasm, all these kinds of qualities, we must progressively bring out the desired development step by step. And to facilitate this process at each stage, we use various symbols. We use symbols, we use mottos, we use sayings. In fact, other helps, periodic group meetings in churches and temples, festivals, pilgrimages, holy places, zeal promoting literature, and even specially designed flags that we can put on the top of a temple or raise up in a church. Spirituality leads to the purification, perfection, and harmonization of all aspects of the individual and collective efforts in life in graded ways. And so spiritual traditions have from times immemorial made provisions for adopting and coordinating all the diverse methods which art and patriotism are nowadays finding increasingly necessary and effective in each particular field. So this idea of symbolism and this idea of images is based on the one factor that you cannot have a single word without a corresponding image. Even if you say, I don't believe in a God with any kind of form, you can't imagine him. Even when you say he, you're giving some human attribute. For example, the Muslims are very proud to say, we have an Allah who is way beyond all concepts. But you see, the reality is there are 99 names for Allah, each representing a certain quality. So while there's no defined human form in it, qualities are there which immediately have corresponding concepts. When I say beneficent, immediately some picture comes to my mind. It might be a representative picture. In other words, an image, an idol of an ideal. It might be something like the sky. It might be something like the sea. It might be something like air. It might be something like the infinite black of the night sky. Whatever it is, some image is there. And when I delineate all the 99 names, for example, of Allah, each name will form its own picture, because I will have to represent it in some way. There can be no word without a corresponding concept. And so nobody is immune from symbols and images. How else will we relate to that highest of the high? The controller, that is the technically called the Antaryaman, the inner controller, and nature, and by nature, as I say, we mean the infinite storehouse from which all bodies and minds come, and all manifestations come. We can take it like that, a beautiful storehouse. And when we think of this as a storehouse, we're thinking of this entity, unmanifested, sitting in potentiality, ready to give us what we want. And our request, our requisition is a thought. And if it is sustained, then that thought inevitably will mobilize all the necessary messengers and elements within nature and deliver it to us. There's no point in having a storehouse if there's no requisition going in. There's no point in having a storehouse if you don't have the necessary infrastructure to select the things that are requested and give it to the necessary messengers to deliver. So nature is something like that. We can think of nature as something like that. And so a methodical application of one's own reasoning till a satisfactory outlook emerges can take place. That's the one method. The second approach might be a little different. It consists of graded disciplines, for example, leading to a direct apprehension of the supreme reality. And by comparison with this, the step-by-step process which consists of these variations. In contrast to that, it will create to us an intellectual theoretical aspect, which for most people will be intellectual and dry. Why not use the capacity of using your whole creative imagination, knowing that all our fears are based in imaginary ghosts of the past, or all our anxieties are to do with imaginary scenarios that bring us fear in the future. So we can use this creative imagination that creates the universe for us in a positive and revealing way. And we can use all the art and culture necessary. The objection on behalf of the Abrahamic religions that say, we don't accept idolatry, make no graven images before me, is because of this tribal background. And Swami Vivekananda, for example, points out, this is all very well, unless and until you have an image of this thing, this entity, this absolute, not exactly an absolute, some entity with qualities, in the form of a golden chest with two winged angels by the side and a cloud in the middle. Is this also not an image? When you construct a temple, will you also not have this kind of imagery which is there? And so, images are necessary. The divine teachers of this world are necessary. And it is these divine teachers that form us with the highest ideals necessary. And we can represent these in a photographic way or in other representative ways, as symbols, for example. Let us take, for example, the origin of the Shiva Linga. That is a kind of mound represented, unkindly often called the a phallic symbol. But let us see what is the origin of such a thing. There's a story about it, how it originated, mythological story. This linga bhava, the origin of the linga, opens with the familiar primeval situation, that is that there's no universe, only water and the starless night of the lifeless interval between dissolution and creation. Now I'm reading this text from Myths and Symbols in Indian Art and Civilization by Heinrich Zillmer, as edited by Joseph Campbell. And I'll make a commentary as we go through it. So, in the infinite ocean of all the seeds, all the potential ties of subsequent evolution rests in a dormant state undifferentiation. And Vishnu, the anthropomorphic embodiment of this fluid of life, is floating, as we have seen him before. Don't forget, Vishnu means that which pervades everywhere, an all-pervading one. And is often these adjectives transformed into nouns. So Vishnu is the whole cosmos. Actually, Vishnu is the whole universe. That we have to understand. So, in and upon the substance of his own essence, in the form of a luminous giant, he is recumbent on the liquid element, radiant with the steady glow of his blessed energy. But now a new astonishing event. Vishnu perceives all of a sudden another luminous apparition, and it is approaching him with the swiftness of light, shining with the brilliance of a galaxy of suns. It is Brahma, the same entity, but in creative form, a creative aspect. The fashioner of the universe, the four-headed one, because omnipresent, he has to be in all directions. He has to be an all-seeing one. Full of yogic wisdom, smiling, this new arrival inquires of the recumbent giant sleeping on the cosmic waters. Who are you? How did you originate? What are you doing here? I am the first progenitor of all beings. I am he who originated from himself. Imagine. And Vishnu begged to differ. On the contrary, he protested. It is I who am the creator and destroyer of the universe. I have created and destroyed it time and again. Now you have a heavenly argument between two alleged deities. The two mighty presences proceeded to contest each other's claims and to quarrel. And while they were arguing in the timeless void, presently they perceived rising out of the ocean a towering lingam. Lingam means a symbol, a sign. So not human, crowned with flame, rapidly it grew into infinite space. And the two divinities, ceasing their discussion, regarded it with amazement. They couldn't measure neither its height nor its depth. You can imagine now the philosophical implications of this mythological story. Brahma said, "You plunge, I shall fly upward. Let us try to discover its two ends." And these two deities assumed their well-known animal forms. Brahma was the gander, or the goose or the swan, and Vishnu the boar. And the bird winged into the heavens. The boar drove into the deep. In opposite directions, on and on they raced, but could not find out either limit of above or below. For a while, the bear descended, and Brahma climbed. The linga grew and grew. As they flew, they grew and grew. And we can have an image now of the universe itself. The universe is expanding into itself. People who don't understand this concept ask, what is the universe expanding into? It's a nonsensical question. If only space is there, it's not expanding into anything. But can you see the limitation of our concepts? So presently, the side of the prodigious lingam burst open, and in the niche-like aperture, the Lord of this sign called lingam stood revealed, Shiva, the force supreme of the universe. And while Brahma and Vishnu bowed before him in adoration, he solemnly proclaimed himself to be the origin of them both. Indeed, he announced himself as a super Shiva. Again, Shiva means auspiciousness, now applied as a noun. The triad of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, creator, maintainer, and destroyer, he had once contained and bodied forth, manifested forth. Though emanating from the lingam, they nevertheless abode permanently within it. They were parts of it, constituents. Brahma the right side, Vishnu the left, but the center was Shiva Hara, the Ariya's absorber, he who takes back or takes away. Thus Shiva appears augmented in the lingam, heightened, enhanced, as the all-comprising basic element. The role of the destroyer now is only one of the three principal manifestations, but side by side with Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the maintainer, Shiva, the destroyer, coexists in Shiva, the supreme, that Vedanta philosophy calls Brahman, only put into tantric language or Shaivite language, but really this idea of Shiva Shakti, and gives us a sign about what is absent. Just as the circle gives us an indication of what is beyond there. It's a circle only. There's no humanity to it. And so this is a great example of a symbol that can lead us through profound concentration and reflection on the highest reality in principle. In his Bhakti Yoga series of lectures, one to people who had this idea, why do you use symbols? Why do you use images? Famously, and we have to also understand that in his own life, when he was part of the Brahma Samaj as Naran, he himself never believed in images. When he was going through, in his own words, the worst patch in his entire life, when his father passed away and his whole family left in debt, and he went to the depths of despair, being rejected house by house, with no food to eat, and not being able to provide for his own family, particularly his mother. He often went without food, barefoot, going in the streets. Such a confident person became hugely dejected. And because of the traditional idea that we have that God is an outside provider, and we worship him when we want, we bring him out in terms of convenience, putting that entity outside ourselves and outside the universe, we now become atheistic when things go wrong. It's all God's fault. How can you believe in the glorious, loving God when I'm in this condition? An interesting question that came up in an interfaith conference, a standard question that we're supposed to discuss. In the light of the COVID virus, how is your faith now in God? Assuming that God is the one who gave this to us, was it a punishment? This kind of thinking, you see, is only worthy at a very fundamentally infantile level. A level where, socially speaking, we are controlled by reward and punishment. Where God is a dispenser of good or evil, where God is a judge or lawmaker or lawgiver. But religion doesn't start at this point. And so one day, he had a spiritual upliftment all of a sudden. Thinking of his master, Sri Ramakrishna, it occurred to him that actually his whole depression, even his starvation, lifted. And he said, I now will dedicate myself as a monk. Like my grandfather did, because his grandfather did that, leave home and become a wandering sadhu. Now it happened in the area which he lived. And so he happened to meet him. And of course, Ramakrishna persuaded him, come back to me, with me to Dakshinaswar, come in the carriage. And he made all kinds of excuses. But eventually he couldn't resist and he went in the carriage. They went to Dakshinaswar in silence. But when they reached there, Ramakrishna broke down in tears, and all the emotion that was suppressed in Swami Vivekananda came out. It's as if they had this understanding, as if they read each other's hearts. But it occurred, of course, one day to Swami Vivekananda in all this trouble, and I can't because I don't believe in the form or the existence of Mother Kali, even though I go to Dakshinaswar, but this old man, he knows it. And one thing I'm sure about is he has the listening ear of the mother. If he only asks for the provision of my needs, I have to ask him, will he do this for me? Surely he will do it. The master replied, I can't ask for such things, but you go and ask. And so they waited in the evening for the right moment, and he went. But he went in an uplifted mood and spirit. And suddenly, this whole mother occupied him. This whole motherliness of God occupied him. And when he came back, Ramakrishna asked him, did you ask? And he said, no. All I could ask was for pure devotion. All I could ask for was discernment, discrimination, and detachment. That's all I could ask for. Go again. He sent him back some 2-3 times. And each time, Vivekananda couldn't do this. What was the secret? Was it the image? Was it the inner feeling? Was it the fact that he saw within the image this profound, infinite nature that is itself nothing more than what religion calls God. And this God with form is something like the cosmic mind presenting itself in a form that is convenient for us, a form that we can relate to, so that it becomes as real as anything else in this universe, and even more real because it is equivalent to the wide scope of the whole that was made in the example of the roof. Not the entire thing, not the entire lifting off of the roof, but enough to relate to what is the sky and the sun. And that is what we call God, the highest reading to the human mind of the Absolute. That is real, that is guiding, that is God in every respect. That is an entity that we can speak to and comes in the form we love the most. Ramakrishna's example, God as it were agrees, like water agrees to be formed into ice. Right now here, snow and ice is everywhere, and it's simply water. It's water, but temperature and pressure have given it a shape and a form. Let's say that there's an iceberg or an ice block in the ocean, and temperature and pressure have formed this. In other words, the infinite has agreed to mold itself into that particular form that we love the most. Then on the other side, the devotee loves, and the burning love will dissolve this. That is, will melt this ice back into the formless. And the culmination of true devotion through the means of signs and symbols and images bring us to this point of perfection and revelation. But it doesn't stop there, because we can go back. We can go back as we could go back in the original example below the clouds and still see the rainbow. But this time we know the secret. Now in his book, this Bhakti Yoga, we find that worship of substitutes and images, what are called Pratima and Pratika. Shankara says, worship of the mind as Brahman, this is worship with regard to the internal, and with the Akasha as Brahman. That is, we think of this Brahman also in an image, but this time it's something like it is an amorphous kind of thing. And that is with regard to the deities. The mind is an internal pratika. Akasha, that is the fundamental ethereal matter, potential, unmanifest, is an external one, and both have to be worshipped as substitutes for God. We have to make substitutes. That's the point. We can't go directly unless with extreme purity of mind, but using the substitutes and using the symbols and using the signs. And similarly, he says the sun is Brahman. This is the command. He who worships name as Brahman. In all such passages, a doubt arises to the worship of pratikas, says Shankara. The word pratika means going towards, something that moves you toward. A symbol moves you towards something that is beyond it. It's not in itself. And worshipping a pratika means worshipping as a substitute, something which is in one or more respects like Brahman, like that entity that we're worshipping, but is, of course, not exactly Brahman. And along with the pratikas mentioned in the Shruti, the perennial portion of scripture, there are various others to be found in the Puranas and the Tantra of ancestor worship and Deva worship of all deities. But these deities are bad. So this really is the lower form of worship, but it is not wrong. It is just equivalent, supreme, absolute entity into it. Then this has a different effect. This has the effect now of the merchant in the story of the Chandi. that is contained in the Chandi. Now worshipping Ishvara, that is God, and Him alone is what we call bhakti. Bhakti yoga, true worship. The worship of anything else, be it of a deity or an ancestor, for the sake of getting something I have to add, or any other being, cannot be bhakti. Let us take, for example, in the Roman Catholic world, where there are many statues, many images, many forms. And let us take, for example, in Roman Catholic churches, you go in and there you'll see possibly Saint Anthony, Saint Joseph, Saint this, Saint that. And Saint Anthony is famous for finding things. If you lose your car keys, the Roman Catholics say, please pray to Saint Anthony, and you'll find them. And sure enough, you can find them. Now, this is not really worship. This is simply mobilizing nature's natural forces through the mediumship of these great saints. So, but if we were to take that same form and see this is an ideal himself, a lover of God, Saint Anthony carrying the Christ child, then feeling how the devotee and the one that is devoted to are welded into the one entity, that we are only seeing that one supreme entity. This now becomes worship. One thing therefore has to be carefully borne, he says, in mind. Brahman is dragged down by pratika worship to the level of the pratika. And the pratika itself is taken to be the Atman of the worshipper. His internal instrument, his internal controller, his antaryaman. Then the worshipper becomes entirely misled. For no pratika can really be the Atman of the worshipper, the Supreme Self. But where Brahman himself is the object of worship, and the pratika stands only as a substitute or a suggestion thereof, that is today where, through the pratika, the omnipresent Brahman is worshipped, then the pratika itself being idealized into the cause of all, or Brahman, the worship is positively beneficial. In fact, he says, nay, it is absolutely necessary for all mankind until they have gotten beyond the primary or preparatory state of the mind with regard to worship. We have to use these helps. And when therefore any gods or other beings are worshipped in and for themselves, such as such worship is only ritualistic action. And as vidya, a science, it gives us only the fruit belonging to that particular science. Because he says, this explains how in many cases, both in the Shrutis and the Smritis, a god or a sage or some other were out of his own nature and idealized into Brahman and is then worshipped. Says the Advaitist, the non-dualist, is not everything Brahman when the name and the form have been removed from it? Is it not he, the Lord, the inmost self of everyone? And says the Vishishta Advaitist that the fruit of even the worship of the Adityas and so forth, Brahman himself bestows because he is the ruler of all. So says Shankaracharya in his Brahma Sutra Bhasha, here in this way, Brahman becomes the object of worship because he as Brahman is superimposed on the pratikas, just as Vishnu and so forth are superimposed upon images. What do Christian missionaries and others, what is their criticism? They say you're worshipping a stone, but that would be observed both for the kritika, for the critique, both in terms of the one that is making the criticism and the one who's receiving it. Because both know that it is not so. But when you say it is more than a mere stone, it is more than a mere image, there is something that it represents. And because I realize that that entity that I'm using, or the means by which I'm accessing that entity is everywhere present, even in this image. That makes a huge difference. So the same ideas apply to the worship of the pratimas, that is the actual images. That is to say, if the image stands for a god or a saint, the worship does not result in bhakti and does not lead to freedom. But if it stands for the one God, the worship thereof will bring both the bhakti and the mukti, both the worship and the freedom. And of the principal religions of the world, we see Vedanta, Buddhism, and certain forms of Christianity freely using images. Only two religions, Islam and Protestantism. These two refuse such help. Yet, and even the Kaaba, the great center of the Muslim pilgrimage, can be considered in the same way. And in rejecting all concrete helps to religion, the Protestants are drifting away every year farther and farther from spirituality. Till at present, there is scarcely any difference between the advanced Protestants and the followers of Auguste Comte, the great atheist, or the agnostics, who preach ethics alone. Now, there's no reason for atheists to be in any way ethical other than consequentialism or utilitarianism. Bhakti, or other than Ishvara. And so we agree with all the definitions to worship something that is other than God. But when that stands in for God and accesses God, and God is seen to be infused in it, it is no longer idolatry. And besides, idolatry will give you the scientific result that you want anyway. So in this form of image worship, the allegiance of the soul is given to other things than Ishvara, and therefore such use of images or graves or of temples or tombs is real idolatry, because it is in itself, but it is in itself neither sinful nor wicked. It's a rite, a ritual, a karma, an action, and worshippers must and will get the fruit of it. But those who worship these symbols and forms, not for themselves or in isolation of this idea that it is Brahman itself, that is now not only bhakti, but it also leads to mukti, freedom. I often remember going to, I think it was the Netherlands, in one place there, and there was a big cathedral in the town I went to. And they had taken away, because of the Reformation, it used to be a Catholic church, but on the outside were all blank spaces. All the images and statues had been taken away. All the artistry had been carefully removed, stripped away, and you go on the inside, and the feeling of worship is not there, because all the artistic sculptures, all the paintings, all the beauty, all the beautiful art and culture, all the things that will elevate the mind and the soul were all stripped away. And where the altar was now gravestones. And in the middle, because it was an aisle, a longitudinal aisle, and it was made into a horizontal structure with the preaching pulpit, the preaching stand in the center. And it had every resemblance of a courtroom, of a secular courtroom. All the spiritual feeling was denuded from it. Imagine. So these are useful helps and artistic and creative nature. And so what a beautiful thing to be able to use and express our innermost depths, not only an aspiration of an ideal, but also an expression of our own feeling toward it. Like if you love somebody, you take a photograph. It was Vivekananda who was that yes, but you see all this image worship. This was in the Maharaja's palace, and the prime minister was saying this, And he said, okay, see that picture of the Maharaja, please take it down and spit on it. He said, oh, I can never do it. But it's only a picture, just made from canvas, just made from, pigments and made with brushwork and so on. What's the harm? So you see, when we have pictures, photographs of our relatives, we treat them as substitutes or symbols, at least, reminders of what it symbolizes. It's more than just a product of a photographic plate. And so with this small talk on signs and symbols and images, we now conclude. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.